the way you should think about this interview was as if it was a kind of an RPG, and you three are playing as people who, and maybe the four of you actually. So that's Luke, Sam, other Sam, Jert, and Alex. You're all playing as like kind of characters who are trying to like, you're in a squad, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to get to the kind of secret chamber in the middle of the interview, which contains a satisfied audience. And my questions, I'm kind of the kind of, I don't know, the demon who lives in the maze, who lives in the labyrinth, who's like kind of trying to cast these questions, which are also spells in the analogy, and you're trying to like kind of undo my spells, which are terrible questions, and reach the satisfied audience. That's how I'm thinking about this interview. Hello, welcome to 12 Rules for What? My name is Sam, here with Alex as usual, and then we are also joined by a bumper crop of excellent guests. We have Luke, Sam, and Jert. Hello.
Hello.
How are you guys doing?
Morning. Oh.
Yeah, it's all right.
Fantastic. Okay, so we are here to discuss. Do you want to tell us, Alex? Do you want to launch into the what we're doing today?
Yeah, so we're here to discuss these guys' new, just about to come out, I think, project, anti-fascist RPG zine, which is much longer than I was, initially expecting. I thought we'd get a couple of scenarios and some nice artwork, but it's 78 pages long almost. So it's a really like bumper edition of this thing, and it's called Postcards from Cable Street, and it's specifically an anti-fascist RPG.
So someone, can I ask a really brief question at the beginning, a technical question for someone who has never played an RPG, or at least has played an RPG but only on the computer? What is this object? What are we discussing here? Like, what is an RPG? What do you do with it? How do you interact with it? And so on. Just like really basic level stuff for people who are totally unfamiliar, such as myself.
So it's like, imagine that instead of having like, your PlayStation or whatever, you got a person, and they're like, basically it's like using the person as a computer. They're like describing stuff. It's a bit more social because it's you and your mates. And it's like, rather than the game telling you what happens, you might roll some dice and be like, oh, I want to do this. And it's like, okay, that's kind of a bit risky. So you might roll some dice. So what we're actually what we've built here, what we're shopping around in for benefits, is a collection of stuff you can use in your game. So one person will read it and be like, whoa, this idea is really sick, I love this, and then they can use that to entertain their friends, and in buying it, put some money towards charity at the same time. So it's trying to also make a bit of a statement that shitheads aren't welcome in our community.
And the community question is like broader RPG playing groups, but also like geek culture more broadly as well.
Definitely. Right? Yeah, there's crossover for sure. Like we're specifically talking about that, but there's definitely, like it's a problem that is broader, I think.
Yeah, personally. I mean, I know that a lot of work is being done in, for example, the metal scene at the moment around similar issues, and you get that in quite a lot of subcultures.
As in, you get far right kind of infiltration to some extent of subcultures. What are the kind of what other subcultures do you think there are? So you mentioned kind of metal subcultures, and obviously we're talking today about RPGs. Anything else? Any other kinds of like subcultures that you think might be particularly prone to this kind of far right interference?
I mean, skinhead culture has obviously always had that issue, and people fighting back against it. That's been going on really since the 80s at the very latest. Ditto, there's issues in the goth culture. Infiltration's probably the wrong word, because what you have is Nazis that are genuinely into this, but also using it to recruit.
That's important. Yeah, that's an important point. So there's
the
like
calls
kind of
coming from inside the house almost, right? Like I think it's like anything that's got a lot of nerds, basically, to put it bluntly. Like anything where you got people who are a bit less like well served by mainstream culture, they try and build their own thing, and they bring any of that poison along with them.
Like the first time I became aware of this kind of thing, this phenomenon as an anti-fascist, was the adoption of Warhammer, particularly by certain sections of the alt-right, and the kind of God Emperor memes that Trump was inspired by the Imperium of Man from that particular universe. And it's something that's actually really fascinated me and I found really interesting is and how different kinds of cultural objects can be read in different ways for different purposes. So, for example, if you take Warhammer, that was my understanding was it originally quite a satirical kind of take on a lot of these tropes, and the Imperium of Man was not meant to be like a good, happy thing to be like aspired to. It was a warning, and some fascists have seen this kind of universe and this dead emperor ruling over everybody forever, and kind of said, yes, this is exactly what we kind of want to happen, and this is a good scenario. So I found that particularly interesting about how we can read these things differently.
You mentioned skinhead culture as well. There's also this kind of like much longer history of kind of overlaps between high fantasy literature or a kind of even invented traditions of invented folk traditions in the early 20th and late 19th centuries, which are used by people on the far right to kind of produce a much longer sense of history to their ideas, which demonstrate a kind of I guess like a racial form of belonging that all people must kind of have in the same way in a certain race, and in order to construct the idea of a folk, and do so through various kind of cultural traditions, which are projected back into the past, even if they've been fairly recently invented. That seems like it's kind of quite a different process than what's going on, for example, in the cultures you're talking about. Do you think that there is this sense in which people are trying to project back in time a mythical culture? Or is there just something, I guess, like more kind of, I don't know, like mundane going on, or something about just kind of the dynamics of social isolation, or of not being, I think, as you described earlier, not being kind of served by a particular kind of culture particularly well? How do you see those things playing out?
I mean, I think there's an element of both. I mean, it's certainly the case that traditionally fascism has, for example, railed against modernism. There's always been quite a big fascist following of Lord of the Rings. So there is this harking back to a mythical past and a use of history almost to argue for that past to return, despite the fact that past, if you talk to any historians, is largely fictionalized. I mean, the all-white Europe that the fascists hark back to never actually existed.
I think it's that escapism part, right? Like, I mean, you're talking about like orcs and dragons and goblins and shit. Like, it's, there's a bit of like fun with that, but partially it's escapism. And I think for some people, it's an escapism from like the burden of being a decent human being, and that's where like this stuff comes in, right? Like, it's like, oh yeah, back in my like fantasy games, it should be I don't have to, I don't know, respect women or pronouns or whatever. Like it's an extra form of escape for them. They don't feel like there's any of those pressures from the modern world.
There's also something kind of like slightly, I guess, like more connected between these two visions of the world, though, right? In high fantasy, as you were saying, orcs, goblins, elves. God, I'm kind of running out of things here, but let's imagine that I've produced a longer list. Dwarfs, is that a thing? Yes. The race of men, and so on. Right? Like these in some ways, like it's very easy to read these as a racial topography, in the manner of like, everything from the kind of the 17th century, and people are first like, okay, there are essentially 4 parts to people, or there are 5 races in total, or now you get more contemporary fascists are much more like kind of fine-grained about this stuff, but nevertheless they are still, kind of organizing the world around a certain kind of topography. And so the topology, sorry, like a set of categories rather than a space, not topography. So I think that there's like a deeper connection here with like people's desire to feel like they are participating in or they have a place that is really fixed and clear in society, which is afforded to them by their race, right? And that seems to be what kind of fantasy suggests. And I wonder, so I'm really guessing, like, how does one take those elements of fantasy, which seem to be so useful to fascism as an ideology, and like undercut them or disrupt them, and like kind of engage with that kind of racial topography that exists in high fantasy literature in a way that is not so that doesn't see race as completely determinative in the way that it is for a goblin who could never be good, or a dwarf who could never be. I don't know what the characters of these things are, but I imagine they have like fixed characteristics.
They definitely can do, and I think like a big part of this is in how you present stuff. Like you deliberately complicate both your understanding and the understanding of your players, whether that's like at a table or in a book or in a charity compilation. You add more dimensions and more kind of attributes. You don't reduce people, because even it's like, yeah, sure, like, oh, goblins generally bad or whatever. It's like, well, why? Like and pressing that why, you kind of can either reveal something about the person presenting that information and they actually do think in these kind of outdated, kind of simplifying boundaries, or they're like, oh no, yeah, that's a good point, that's like an interesting question, let's play to find out. And that's like that kind of using it as an explorative tool rather than laying down some sort of dictates. You can definitely instead be like, well, we don't know, and let's talk about it and find out through the process of playing. But yeah, I think like your point around it being used to simplify the world, like that definitely carries water. Like it's definitely a thing that attracts certain people because it's easier than real life.
I guess that aspect of being able to play with the categories as you play through them, right? So the narrative undermines the categories of who is good, who is bad, and so on.
Yeah, totally.
Is also like a really important reason why these things are normally done by, as you were saying at the very beginning, like it's like playing with a person rather than playing with a computer, right? Because the person can make this decision more or less arbitrarily to kind of step outside this categorization, whereas the computer is simply running whatever algorithms the player is, not the player, the programmer has kind of put into it. And so this social dimension of it is in some ways like the thing that allows you to question these categories or to get beyond them.
I think it's also important to point out that when we talk about RPGs, we're talking about not just fantasy, we're talking about many different genres, and you can construct a world that isn't like so racially tinged or whatever fantasy is. I'm playing a game at the moment which is called Eclipse Phase, which is like a sci-fi version of D&D, I suppose. And in that one, it's a totally kind of, you can choose whatever body you want, and it's not like the kind of dwarves are dwarves and goblins are goblins. So there is like that critique, I think, is particular to a certain genre, I think.
And it's also to an extent a certain historical genre. I mean, what we have to remember is that Dungeons and Dragons started in the late 70s and society has moved on by then. So we need to look at RPGs moving on as well, because there are certain, sexist and racist assumptions that come with that history.
I was actually reading a thing that was retweeted by your Twitter the other day about Warhammer and its kind of origins, and how D&D has there's a particular kind of fantasy style of like sexualized women monsters. I don't know how to describe it, like female spiders with like bikinis and stuff. And that kind of style of kind of fantasy is, of the 70s and of the 80s. That's very true. Like I said at the start, there's a lot of stuff in here. Do each of you have a particular favorite or kind of meaningful scenario within the book that you might want to introduce quickly?
I think I might be the only one with a copy of it.
Okay.
I'm one of two of us with a physical copy of it. We ordered the proofs. I could definitely tell you all of Sam's stuff. Were the text pieces, the playlist, are fantastic. I love all of the game stuff. Working games all day, every day. What got me were, like I said, the text pieces, the interview that Luke did with Fiona. That stuff hit me harder, better.
So the PDF that we received is built. I mean, it's not going to be a PDF in the physical thing. It was like a physical copy, but it's built around a series of distinct scenarios. I thought it was just going to be one thing, but it's not. As Alex said at the very top, it's like a huge number of different scenarios. Do you want to just tell us like about one of them? The first one I had was the one on the train, with an amusing reference to Mussolini's actual historical failure to make the trains run on time, which is rarely mentioned. Do you want to just tell us one?
My super favorite is Izzy's Canned Laughter Hell for Mothership. You are essentially trapped. Your players are trapped inside this space station, which is also the setup for a sitcom. So that's the station's entire situation is they're recording a sitcom. So the actors are there, the producers there, the directors there. Bad shit's happening. The station is kind of going haywire. Without giving too many spoilers, I think Izzy wrote a fantastic setup. I think David did an amazing job with the design, and that's the one I can't wait to bring to the table.
I mean, I think it's also important, and one of the things that we aimed for was it's a diverse group of voices, it's a diverse group of games.
How much are these trying to like represent a certain politics and like have like a narco-communist game and everyone's a narco-communist, a different like faction to the left, and how much do you want to be interrogating that politics itself and using that as a backdrop to tell other stories? Because it seems to me that it's quite easy, I think, to fall into the kind of a trap of representing politics without actually engaging in it within the game itself.
I think a big part of what we wanted to do was do both. Basically, we wanted to have stuff that was explicitly like, you are just straight up like trying to solve problems as, somebody of a certain political persuasion in a certain situation. And some of them are just like, here's just some cool game stuff that's like informed by it, but doesn't necessarily grapple with it, because it's like, the big critique that a lot of people always have is like, like the social justice warriors or whatever will always try and force their politics into the games. And it's like, even if you're like showing that you're not, a piece of shit, basically, you're also trying to still have a good time and still just have fun. It doesn't need to all be that, but equally, there's some stuff in here like the constitution of moon number, lots of numbers after that. Like that's a really fun and interesting piece that is the constitution of a moon colony that's broken free. Like that's super interesting, right? Like that's a fun thing, and it's kind of talking about your stuff, talking about some of the actual difficulties of achieving something, but also kind of telling a story about some of the mistakes they made. And that's really interesting. And it's a way to engage with your politics and represent them and talk about some of the problems with them and still have a cool, fun game like item.
We're talking about this project as like an anti-fascist, kind of RPG zine. But obviously there's another kind of aspect that comes into it, which is the anti-fascism as a politics that's practiced in as separately as anti-fascism. What has your history been in that kind of politics? And it's also fine to have no history as well. And how has that kind of informed your interest in RPGs, or how is it kind of interacted with that particular interest?
I mean, personally, I, back in the 90s, was a member of an anti-fascist group called Anti-Fascist Action for 10 years, give or take a year. And I mean, it really just intersected because my other main interest was RPGs and geekdom. And it's fair to say that a lot of the people I knew at the time had similar interests. So it really was just an organic procedure. More recently, I took some time off because I was suffering from burnout and actually started getting seriously back into anti-fascist work again, ironically, just before lockdown, which obviously has meant there's not a lot of things like demonstrations going on right now.
It does mean there's not a lot of things about demonstrations going on, but it also does mean that like now that the whole of life is lived on the internet. So back in 2019, hallowed days before COVID, if you can remember that, like, there was a sense like, I don't know, like 70% of life was online or something. Right. And now it's almost at 100. And so I think like in this context, as what you might think of as kind of politics proper, falls into kind of cultural representation. It falls into kind of strategies of like kind of culture and these kind of things that happen online. The importance of cultural anti-fascism. So you might think it was kind of not like direct confrontation with the far right, but politics that are kind of what you might call the meta politics, which is like to attempt to produce the kind of cultural grounds for future anti-fascist movements, and to like oppose fascism not just as a particular concrete kind of political phenomena, but as a set of ideas, right? This takes on a new importance as everyone has just like now been spending all their time online, right? So in some ways, like this is a perfect moment for something like this to happen. I wonder what you think is of a kind of a wider turn in culture towards express anti-fascism, and do you think there's anything else other than this particular kind of set of scenarios for RPGs that might be others in kind of important in this trend towards a more like explicitly cultural anti-fascism?
I suppose one thing with a lot of these kind of, like you say, this cultural stuff, a lot of it's about building spaces. And I think people building spaces, it's going to be, certainly to begin with, on the down quiet. And as we see a lot of people now potentially getting involved more, as you say, because life is the internet for a bit, I think we're not necessarily going to see it. It's going to be happening in the background, and whilst that's not necessarily the most effective for building that kind of hostile structure, because ultimately, like, that's what we want. We want to build a hostile environment for fascism, ultimately, like, and then use that absence to build whatever your vision is. But like tactics dictates first, you know, clear out the mess, then we'll build something new. Otherwise, your foundation's going to be rotten. And I think we might not be seeing as much action as is actually going on, because I think a lot of people are doing stuff in the background. Like, you know, I mean, you know, there's private communities where people are talking, recruiting, thinking about what they do next. But I don't think there's a lot that's happening surface level beyond, like, you know, arguments on Twitter, which I don't know how much they matter. You know, it's one of those tough questions, because like diversity of tactics dictates, sure, you know, do your thing, but equally, you know, I've been in arguments on Twitter. I don't know if they're particularly useful for anyone.
I guess some of the kind of criticism of this kind of culture anti-fascism is essentially that it's subcultural, right? That it speaks only to small segments of the population who are interested in playing RPGs. I mean, I am interested in playing RPGs. I've never actually done it, so this is the this is like I'm sure there's a lot of people in this kind of grey zone, right? And so I think like even though there's this kind of criticism that one could make of like subculture anti-fascism, projects like this also allow for a much like softer entrance ramp, you know, into anti-fascism as like a broader culture, right? So yeah, there are two options. Either you can like kind of enter into anti-fascism by basically being in some sense like physically threatened by the far right and responding to that in an organized fashion, or you can enter into anti-fascism by like the extremely slow and painstaking and actually really kind of useful work of diffusing anti-fascist kind of norms and anti-fascist ideas into culture at large, part of which contains quite well-defined subcultures, right? Where the far right might have more of a kind of a foothold. So I think like,
yeah, like as we mentioned,
make any sense.
Yeah, like as you mentioned earlier, like there's a certain trend within, like, as what I termed, like, you know, your nerd communities, with like there being this larger impact, like there's a larger percentage then versus the general population who are like, you know, super far right extremists or whatever. So I think like, yeah, efforts within that subcultural areas have an outsize effect for what they should do, just on sheer numbers, because these are the recruiting grounds, because it's where people end up when they're dissatisfied. And like, I don't think many people end up fascist without some level of dissatisfaction. You know, something makes you unhappy and then you turn into a fascist. Like there's not many, you know, jolly fascists out there. So I think like making these spaces hostile is really important.
I would definitely second that. I think I don't really see this necessarily as like a subcultural project. It's more an intervention into a certain subculture. But it's not saying, okay, well, you're shaking your head for whatever. I would also make the point that kind of geek culture is no longer like the niche thing it was. Like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is, you know, omnipresent in our culture and is culture essentially. And so these things are taking on a much more kind of central place in, and I would say an increasingly central place in our kind of general culture rather than subculture. In many ways, subculture is kind of breaking down. And that's another reason why it's so important to be aware and be present about what's going on in different places.
And I'd also say that there is a lot to be said for people doing the work in cultures and subcultures they're already involved in. I think realistically, as someone who isn't a skinhead, me trying to intervene in the skinhead scene is not going to have the same impact as somebody who is known in that scene, who goes to all the skinhead gigs declaring themselves anti-racist and anti-fascist.
Yeah, that's a really important point. There's just where I live, there's like a really famously racist pub just up the road, where lots of like kind of football hooligans go and drink and like have, I guess, like fights with other firms. And strangely, I've not yet been able to make a serious intervention into this. You'll be shocked to know. Yes, no, I think that's absolutely important, and like people should do the political work like where they can do. There's a kind of a broader trend as well. Like I'm thinking of kind of other things that are kind of RPG adjacent, like art world LARPing, right? So LARPing, live action role play, right? Like Brian Large, until I think maybe kind of 10, 15 years ago, confined largely to like historical reenactment and things like this. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Apologies to kind of a LARP aficionados. But I think I am wrong. Okay, let's go.
as a LARPer, there was quite a lot of sci-fi stuff. It's partly because of visuals. It's the stuff that gets recognised tends to be the high fantasy, but you had quite a lot of small little games playing with things like Far Future and things like that at the time as well.
I once did a LARP about a dating app that was in the kind of the near future, and we had to kind of go on dates in the LARP, which I don't like doing in real life. So it was a pretty stressful LARP anyway. But yeah, there's been this kind of expansion of like LARP and kind of thinking about strategies of, I guess, like cloaking yourself in avatars, or cloaking yourself in a kind of in a character who is not yourself, as a way of exploring like a totally different kind of world. And I'm really interested in these games in particular, in this kind of tension between, on the one hand, this world in which we know things about each other, in which we have to kind of like collaborate to do certain tasks, and this kind of fantasy world. And it seems like all of the in the ones I kind of looked through, there was this like continuous tension between a sense of like sort of unusualness or fantasy and like quite realism and kind of quite intensely kind of I don't know, particularity, or like kind of even just like realism to the games. And I wonder like how this is kind of useful, I think, as a mix for letting us deploy strategies that are, I guess, like kind of familiar, but on the other hand have this aspect of being estranging, making us a stranger to ourselves, and therefore allowing a certain kind of freedom.
I think there's certainly an element of that, and I actually before lockdown was running LARPs every month or so, and what it does do is it gives in some ways minor or one-off scenarios, and it gives people a safe way of experimenting with different personas and different worlds that you can then hang up at the end of the day. But I think what's vital for that, and what we did is, because it was my own group and it was a small group, it was the fact that the group had formal anti-racist, formal anti-fascist, formal anti-sexist policy that gave people the freedom to experiment with that in the first place.
That's much more succinct and well phrased than I was going for. Thank you. Yes, good. What's, I guess, like kind of interesting about like contemporary far right cultures, like non-skinhead cultures, or non kind of like Nazis with swastikas on their faces kind of culture, like the alt-right or something like that, which is that it's both on the one hand kind of engaging with these like these myths, these kind of fantasies, the kind of the the meme magic and the god of Kek and so on, right? All these kind of aspects of mythology, or like can pretend aspects of kind of a pseudo mythology, while at the same time totally playing around with identity by like sometimes being a troll, sometimes not being a troll, sometimes being really earnest, sometimes being really serious. And so there's the same kind of like play with identity that goes on perversely in some parts of the contemporary far right. It's not in any way identical to what's happening in most LARPs, but there is this kind of fluidity to the far right that I think is increasingly kind of like a tricky thing to get a hand on.
They're all irony poisoned effectively, right? Like they'll take the piss out of their own beliefs, but it's like a weird self-reinforcing loop. It starts as a joke, you keep saying it, you start genuinely saying it. That's happened to me with dumb jokes, right? That's how like memes work. Like as like a younger person, I don't know, I feel like obviously I don't get the beliefs, but I get how you can kind of cycle over stuff and iterate on it so many times until you don't know whether it's a joke or not. And it's like, I'm just saying it and I hate that I'm saying it, but I'm going to keep doing it, and it's a very weird and potentially very modern thing. The idea
God,
is like
that's so relatable.
yeah. I'm heavily related to what you just said there, right? I also I guess we just finished up two quite big projects, and I was reading a lot of Far material, and I started falling into the patterns of this kind of casual, a bit bad internet language. Not racist stuff, but like the kind of uncaring language that you often find on certain corners of Twitter and on 4chan and stuff. The kind of like you said, irony poisoned uncaringness almost, which I didn't like about myself when I did change. So yeah, I do relate to that quite heavily actually.
I want to ask about cringe. I have a question here. I don't know how to formulate it. So for those who do not know, cringe is like when something is embarrassing or like kind of makes you feel kind of squeamish. And cringe is often kind of like a response of people who are very online, who have developed through being online an extremely refined and somewhat like defensive sense of what people should be doing, right? So like people who think that things are cringe by and large have like an extremely clear and often quite arbitrary sense of what is cool and what is cool to be doing and what is not cool to be doing. And I wonder if this kind of irony poisonedness that you were discussing in relation to the online far right, which I totally agree with, I wonder if that kind of irony poison comes out of a kind of reflexive defense of things that you might otherwise enjoy. Sorry, defense against things you might otherwise enjoy. So, for example, an interest in RPGs or Warhammer is undoubtedly not what like the cool kids do, right? But nevertheless, like, and so you might think about this kind of like cringe as a kind of defensiveness against the possibilities of enjoyment, right? So you could enjoy this stuff.
Cringe is about I'm not like that is what a lot of it boils down to, and it's that defining the self through the negation of others. Yes. It's like you see it a lot like internally. There's like there's the out group and then the in group cringe, right? And it's like, oh, I might be into this, but I don't like that sort of thing. And it's distancing the self from what you perceive. Oh, I don't want that like bad, whatever it is to rub off on me. So they're cringe. And like you say, it's that kind of like hyper refined, overdeveloped sense of what's good and what's bad, because it comes from insecurity, right? Like people who are like, oh, that's cringe or whatever, it's because they don't like themselves on some level. And it's, they're trying to make themselves feel better because at least I'm not like that. And saying something like that is easier than trying to make yourself a better person. Like, it's much easier to say, well, at least, I'm not like that guy, rather than, oh, I should work on myself. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from, this cringe. But I mean, it happens in group, and everyone will catch themselves doing it. Like you see someone post something and it's like, oh, why did you say that? Like you put that in a really goofy way, you fool, or something. It's like you posted cringe, but it's like, oh, they just made a mistake. It's not a big deal. And there's no need to like push them away. It's fine.
Often I think that the things people describe as cringe are also things people might otherwise really care about. Like, for example, like it's cringe to feel things. It's cringe to...
Emotions are the most cringe thing possible, right? Like any genuine, sincere expression is cringe. And it's like until someone goes, no, it's based, it's cringe or whatever. Like it's ridiculous. And it is irony poisoned. Like
right. And as a Gen Xer, I have to say, I think a lot of that one is our fault. Is that there is obviously talking about generations is always a bit fraught. But there was a way in which my generation presented taking anything seriously, even if you should do, as something that was a bit beyond the pale.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, the long-term effect of that, I think, maybe this is overstating my case like quite substantially, but like, let's go with that. The long-term effect of refusing to take anything seriously is that you ultimately take the most seriously that which should not be taken seriously at all. Right. For example, you ultimately take serious notions of a kind of mythical racial collective, right? Which is a nonsensical notion that like no one should seriously propagate. And yet this is the kind of the core of quite a lot of far-right beliefs, right? And so by trying to refuse sincere attachment to anything that makes you feel in a kind of a problematic or a kind of a confusing way, for yourself, right? Like, so you're not quite sure how to feel about it, or makes you feel ambiguous, or makes you feel vulnerable, or something like this, right? Like, so at the very end of that process of refusing all feelings of vulnerability lies absolutely uncritical assertions of continuity with the most mythically absurd objects, right? Because like otherwise you end up in this total state of nihilism, and you can't really live like that. So I think even if cringe is not itself a fascist feeling, the end result of a lifetime spent cringing is fascism. That's my extremely bold claim in this. That's my take for the episode. That's it.
Okay, that's a massive, huge
I'm
take.
done.
If someone wanted to, if someone's like interested in RPGs and wants to like kind of get into playing an RPG, where would you recommend people look online, or how should they go about it? Because oftentimes, I suppose the way I started playing RPGs was I had a friend who was very into it already and offered to run a game, and I kind of learned as I was going along, basically. But I guess it's harder to like meet up with friends right now, and so a lot of these things are happening online anyway. So I just wondered where you would recommend people looking, apart from, of course, postcards from Cable Street.
There are several scenarios, adventures, modules in Postcards from Cable Street. I'll do the quick list of stuff that they're written for. Mothership, sci-fi horror RPG. The original Blue Collar space game.
What is the Blue Collar space game? Sorry, total lack of knowledge over here. What is a Blue Collar space game?
So think Alien. Like the first Alien film, you are on the ship. You're corporate. You're right. You're an employee, and you're trying to live your daily life and do your job. And no, cosmic horror or mental horror or physical horror, something happens. And you've got to fight that back. And like you said, the blue collar aspect comes in from the corporation firm. You are actually inspired, you are actually employed by that. And like I said, and then the cosmic horror, the dread.
That's a real health and safety risk.
Other people. And then Melsonian Arts Council, our flagship game there, Troika. Whimsical science fantasy, so a healthy dose of everything weird, but as Luke said, the best way to get at us to talk to us is Discord. And just on the back of the book there's like a list of system names. Grab those, search that, add Discord to your search string. You're going to find a lot of open, welcoming places where the creators are there.
No, I'm just going to point out, as someone who's like kind of been playing for a year or so, but not like in it necessarily, is that I think the good thing about RPGs particularly is that it's kind of, you can play off the kind of narrative aspect as well as like the game aspect as well. Like you there's no failing at it. As long as you're together telling a good story, you can like kind of bend some rules if you want to, or play a simplified version to get you started and then add more complexity. Like the person running the game is, accommodating to the group as well in many ways. And so I think it's a hobby that's kind of got kind of a long ramping up to into, if you know what I mean. Where can people download or access the book?
More info soon. We're putting the finishing touches on the final product right now. All of those places. As soon as we have a final list, we'll get you guys the final list for.
And it will be up on the Twitter as well as soon as we have a final list of where people can get it.
And the Twitter is
the Twitter is cable_from. But if people search for Postcards from Cable Street, we should come up.
Great, and we'll put that in our episode show notes as well, so people will find it quite easily.
Just the other thing I wanted to mention is that all proceeds from this fanzine are going to two groups. the long-standing anti-fascist group Hope Not Hate, and Football Lads and Lasses Against Fascism, which obviously again do subcultural work, but in their case they very much do it on the terraces.
Yes, I mean, I mean, football culture is so unbelievably huge. I would shy away from calling it even a subculture, but yes, absolutely. They're both really interesting groups. Thank you very much to everyone for coming. Go and get this object, this book, Postcards from Cable Street. We'll see you very soon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting, a really good conversation.
Yeah, cheers.
I'm Kami.
And I'm Franz, and together we are co-hosts of the Doomer vs. Bloomer podcast on the Channel Zero Network.
Every week I'm going to complain about how the world is fucked, things are definitely going to get worse before they get better, and we're all probably going to die.
And I disagree with Kami and think that having hope is important. We can make things better, but only if we believe we can and put in all the effort we're able to into organizing against capitalism and the state.
Yeah, we'll see.
That's the core of our podcast, y'all. It's our shtick. We disagree.
Find our show on SoundCloud or wherever you find podcasts, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Doomer v. Bloomer.
Thanks a lot for listening. If you enjoyed that, then you can go over to Patreon, where we now have a whole bunch of more premium episodes and essays and other things like that. We're also starting a book club for people who want to get more into this stuff. You can read along with us. We'll talk about it. We'll have regular Zoom calls. It'll be great fun. And on the higher tier, we'll even send you a copy of our 2 books when they drop. That's patreon.com/12 rules for what. All the support we get means a lot to us, and it really does help us grow this project. And thanks a lot for listening again, and I'll see you very soon.
12 rules.